Hi, everybody. My name is Nancy Proctor. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at the Peale, and I have the very great pleasure of welcoming you all to this final program in Lee Boot's amazing exhibition project, Abstracts and Artifacts, which we've had the great pleasure of hosting at the Peale, both in our historic museum building, the first to be built in the Americas, online through programs like this one, and coming very soon at the virtual Peale in Second Life as well. So thank you very much for being here today, and special thanks to everyone who has been able to donate or become a sustaining member of the Peale. You help us make programs like this free and available to everyone. The Peale's mission is about amplifying and sharing the voices and stories that too often have been overlooked or intentionally erased from the historical record. So before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the Peale in Baltimore stands on the traditional ancestral and unceded lands of the Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock indigenous peoples. In this age of virtual events, we encourage everyone to spare a moment to acknowledge the original stewards of the land you're joining us from today. I'd also like to thank and recognize Ryan Coons, Peter Dayton, and Ashley Minner of the Lumbee tribe, as well as the Historic New Orleans Collection Education Department for their land acknowledgements, which have inspired and informed my own appreciation of those whose homelands I occupy today, and the Peale's work to amplify Indigenous voices and histories. You can turn on captions in this Zoom session today if you would like. There is also ASL interpretation, and thank you and welcome to our interpreters, Karan and Cheyenne. Please be sure to tell your friends that accessibility is a core value here at the Peale, and they'll find our online and in-person programs interpreted and captioned wherever possible, which is almost always. Last week, we presented another online program in which Lee took us through his 25-year retrospective at the Peale. If you missed it, the video recording with captions, ASL interpretation, and a full transcript will be available on our website soon, along with the recording of today's program. Today, it's Lee's turn to hear from a brilliant panel of artists and scientists he's brought together to talk about the art-science divide and how they bridge it in their work. I'm particularly thrilled to host this program as it sits firmly within a more than 200-year tradition of the Peale bringing together the arts and sciences. As you may know, the Peales were polymaths, as interested in science and new technologies as they were in museology and the European tradition of painting. Although Charles Willson Peale named most of his biological children after famous European artists and taught them all to paint, including his daughters, a couple of scientists were also family namesakes. Benjamin Franklin Peale was named after Peale's close friend, and Charles Linnaeus Peale was named after the Swedish scientist who introduced taxonomy, the modern system of naming organisms that we still use today. Notably, Titian Ramsay Peale was both an explorer and a naturalist. Famously, he accompanied the first private museum-sponsored exploration in the United States in 1817, and then ventured into the North American West and South America on later expeditions running through the 1840s. His notebooks and drawings from those journeys introduced American and European audiences to the species he had encountered, and he amassed the largest collection of butterflies and moths in the world at the time, which you can still see in Philadelphia at the Academy of Natural Sciences. So with that brief introduction, I will hand over to Lee, who will introduce all the other panelists for today's program. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Nancy. And I would like to just begin by thanking the Peale. They've just been incredible to work with on this entire exhibition and all the programming included. And today that includes Nancy Proctor, Kim Domansky, Alexis Tyson, Heather Shelton, Daisy Brown. And also I want to thank our panelists for doing this today. It's really, I'm so grateful. And I think what we have to talk about, given who you are and what you've done, is going to be just amazing. And I want to thank the audience for making this part of their day today. So I'm both moderator and participant today. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Lee Boot, as Nancy said. I'm artist and a researcher and director of UMBC's Imaging Research Center. I initiate transdisciplinary projects that almost always include scientists, I bring the artistic method, specifically artistic thought process, to teams of scientists and policymakers to learn if that will lead to more imaginative science and policies, and also help us navigate the cultural dimensions of our public challenges. I've been principal investigator for research projects funded by NIH foundations, and I've done commissions for the National Academy of Sciences. Stephen Bradley, artist Stephen Bradley, is joining us. Stephen Bradley is a professor of art at UMBC, whose art and community projects extend and expand the artistic tradition that grounds artistic production in various aspects of place. He creates and performs sound compositions using field recordings, often gathered with highly specialized microphones. He tags, maps, and makes artworks from trash, and he studies and documents, I love this part, the biofilms that form on them. Steve's more recent works are created in collaboration with community scientists, ecologists, and social organizers, translating and sharing art and science with residents of the places where his work originates. Tahir Hemphill is a creative technologist whose work straddles art, technology, and research. Tahir focuses on the role systems play in the generation of form and collaborative knowledge production for community resilience. This pursuit is manifest at his RAP research lab, where they catalyze critical discourse and influence tech policy through the production of VR, AI, and community data projects. His RAP research lab exhibition is currently at the Center for Art, Design, and Visual Culture at UMBC. Tahir is the fourth chair in education at the Library of Congress, the inaugural 2021 UMBC Faculty Diversity Fellow in the Arts. He's the 2019 Verizon 5G EdTech Challenger winner, 2019 Saul Zantz Innovation Fund in Film and Media Studies Fellow, 2018 LACMA Art and Technology Lab grantee, 2016, this is just amazing. The list goes on. 2016 Rockefeller Foundation Bellagio Center resident, and 2016 Spotify Media Artist in Residence, 2015 NEA Artworks grantee, 2012 Du Bois Institute Fellow at Harvard University, and finally 2012 Creative Capital Awardee. Anita Kamladi is an associate professor in the Department, of Information Systems and the graduate program director for Online Information Systems Master's Program at UMBC. Her research areas span the fields of human-computer interaction, human information behavior, and virtual reality. She studies information behavior and behavior in various contexts, such as language, such as across languages, and designs user interaction with information-intensive applications. Her research in VR has examined collaborative information use behaviors and the usability of VR systems. Her research has been funded by the National Science Foundation, by Google, and the European Research Council. Tristan King is an interactivity design and engineering specialist at the Imaging Research Center and is the lead software developer there. His degree in individualized study with a focus on digital therapeutics development from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Tristan has worked extensively on virtual and augmented reality projects at the Imaging Research Center and in personal endeavors. Prior to his involvement with the IRC, he developed a financial education training program, platform, for Baltimore-based startup Ortis Academy. Eric Schott is a molecular geneticist with an interest in the health of estuaries, the life within them, and the people who use them. Through long collaborations with watershed advocates and science educators in Baltimore, he strives to better communicate knowledge of water quality and biodiversity to non-scientists. He believes that science communication should start with shared sensory experience and familiar concepts. For example, everyone imagines something similar when thinking of a fish, even if it has a different significance to different people. By collaborating with artists, Schott wants to bring more diverse perspectives to defining what a healthy estuary is. Ryan Zuber is an artist and expert 3D modeler and animator and technical director of the Imaging Research Center at UMBC. Ryan works with interdisciplinary teams of artists, scientists, and engineers to address challenges of conceptual, creative, and technical complexity. He has contributed to projects shown at the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Maryland Historical Society, the National Academy of Sciences building in Washington, D.C., the Peale Museum, the Wild Center, and the Space Foundation in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Ryan has worked as a science illustrator at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, where he spent several years producing illustrations for NASA missions such as the Solar Dynamics Observatory, the NPO-ESS Preparatory Project, and the Global Precipitation Measurement Mission. A special note, Anita, Tristan, and Ryan all work together with me at the Imaging Research Center. I've included them to help us get a little bit more granular, if needed, about what this work really looks like. And I also want to give a shout out, and this is very important, to other colleagues that just happen to be at UMBC, but there's so many other colleagues that are working in this area nationally. I just don't want people to think we are the only people working in the science and art realm around here. But namely, I'm talking about the work of Lynn Casaban, Lisa Morin, and Fouad Hamidi, just to name a few. So to start today and kind of set the tone, I wanted to quote the American journalist and author Derek Thompson, who has recently written an article in The Atlantic entitled "Why the Age of American Progress Ended." In this article, after discussing successful vaccine programs such as smallpox, he writes, "Implementation, not mere invention, determines the pace of progress, a lesson the US has failed to heed for the past several generations." He cites that Operation Warp Speed was ingenious and admirable, but it doesn't matter what you discover or invent if people are unwilling to accept it. So today we'll be talking about the version of social practice, social art practice that engages science and art collaborations and that connects to community. And to do that, we're going to kind of explore three questions. We're going to dig into what this version of social practice actually looks like on the ground day to day, what we hope to accomplish with it, and what we should do next to advance it. We'll also have a Q&A period at the end where I'll give you a couple prompts if that's useful, but it's really open to everyone. This will be a somewhat informal panel for a lot of it, I hope, where we're inspiring each other to comment on one another's ideas. So now I want to switch to some slides and ask our different panelists to describe one or two projects that they've been working on that will help you, the audience, understand kind of where we are all coming from. So let me see if I can make this work. Is everyone seeing the audience version, not my presenter version?
We're seeing the presenter.
You are, okay. Well, that just figures, doesn't it? All right, let me stop the share and switch that. Try that again. You never know. Great. How about now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm going to start with you, Steve and Eric. I'll support what you say with slides. Remember, you can tell me to go to the next slide, or I'll just do it whenever I feel like it. Let's start with this one.
Okay, great. Now I'll go ahead and start, and Eric, feel free to jump in at whenever you'd like. So this project that Eric and I developed is called BioBuggy, which is a human-powered mobile art and science laboratory on wheels that serves a biodiversity study that's currently been in progress for the last 4 or 5 years, as well as a community engagement series of events focusing primarily on Southeast Baltimore City, which is surrounded by a lot of industrial companies, but humans or the residents are sort of tucked in between all of this industrial area. So this biodiversity project is really meant to engage with the public, but also serve the biodiversity study. And it came out of a conversation with Eric about 6 years ago when I was observing he and his colleagues from the aquarium, his interns, lugging all this equipment to the site of the biodiversity study. And actually this site, what we're looking at, is next to the aquarium. I think it's Pier 3 or 4. And there's a biodisc that's right off the edge, which is used to collect bioinformation that's scraped, collected, and then DNA sequenced. But they also do a video documentation and short narratives about where the information comes from. And you see the screen here is a forget the organism. What is that? That's a
seeing barnacles and
barnacles.
biozones.
Yeah. So this project, I also was thinking about as I was observing the science taking place, that community members who are out on holiday, leisure, visiting the aquarium, were curious and watching us. So it made me realize that maybe what if we made this BioBuggy attractive like an ice cream kiosk, except that we're offering biodiversity information. Art. The art is actually underwater recordings, as well as your typical sort of drawings and so forth. I don't know, Eric, you want to?
Yeah, I'll pick it up from there. First of all, this was this interactive object was kind of a game changer for me. I've been interested in how to connect with non-scientists about what I do, because I think what we do as environmental scientists is really important. And there's a lot of talk in the popular press about the environment, but there are questions of things like water quality, or there's issues of achieving bay restoration goals. Those concepts seem like they're simple, but they don't actually describe anything that anyone has a shared experience of. And what I loved about this project, with, first of all, the partnership with the National Aquarium, and then the partnership with Steve Bradley, was that we're visualizing and bringing into view the life that's in the harbor. These are the organisms that tell us about the health conditions of the harbor. You know, a numerical score of water quality doesn't communicate anything to people that they can carry away and think about or care about. So for us, this was just an amazing recognition on Steve's part that, first of all, he observed that what people were doing, as the outside lens, he was observing that people were curious about what we were doing as we did our research. And they would sort of peer, and you could see them pause and stop and see the wheels turning, like, should I talk to this scientist? It looks like they're really busy. And of course, if they talk to us, we love to tell them about it. But this cart just invited them. It basically communicates that, yes, you can come and talk to us. We wouldn't have put this colorful thing out here with a microscope on it if we didn't expect you to come and ask us what we're doing.
And this also includes a kind of curriculum that we're developing that's dynamic and ever changing. And so this is, we did a project in Garrett Park with the Friends of Garrett Park. It's a park that's going through a transformation, thinking about public health and the community that surround that park and making it more accessible. So we move this cart right to the location of where we're engaging with the community. And so I have a coloring book that I've developed that talks about biodiversity and water quality, and then what are the critters that are on the land, and what are the critters in the water, and to connect the dots that what we're doing on the terrestrial side has an impact on the water side.
Wonderful. And there's a nice shot of you and your colleagues with this out there on the landscape. Great. So now let's switch to hear Hemphill. Tahir, take it away.
Hey, how's it going? You want me to explain what's in this slide here?
Yeah, you've seen the slides that I have. So any order you want to, anything you want me to do, I'll just do, but I'm starting with this slide.
Yeah, this is a photograph of my current solo exhibition up at CBAVC. And it's the name of a project. It's a project that I named to be an umbrella of a lot of work that I've been doing over the years. And the Rap Research Lab is a Baltimore-based creative technology studio. And we pioneer new digital forms by engaging in big data, artificial intelligence, natural language processing. And we engage in those things to create opportunities for creativity, opportunities for cultural research, individual expression, and collaborative problem solving. And the work sits on top of an archiving project that I've been working on for about a decade that analyzes the language in rap lyrics from 1979 to current day. And we have about 1 million songs analyzed in about 40 different languages. And I would estimate we have about 250, 300 data points for each song. So the database builds, a geography of language of hip hop. So you could do a search for, cream cheese and find out every rapper that rapped about cream cheese, where in the world they rapped about cream cheese, and the context that they rapped about cream cheese. And this current slide is a learning platform we built on top of this data. It's an augmented reality learning platform called Mapper's Delight. And it offers a sculptural data visualization built on top of these semantic relationships of the rap lyrics. And it shows how rappers cover the globe with references to cities, neighborhoods, regions. And the explorers, in this case, we have a partnership, Rap Research Lab has a partnership with Verizon, and we've distributed this learning platform nationwide to a network of 1.2 million middle school students. Not all 1.2 are using the platform yet, but that's what we're aiming to do. And with the platform, we also have a teaching curriculum that teaches STEM, specifically mathematics, critical thinking, skills that you need to become an engineer, of course, geography, in a fun and, we hope, engaging way. And and one of the reasons why this is my approach is because early on when I started this work, I realized how helpful it was for me to learn and to discover and to, honestly change my material conditions. Technology is, is a good way to be successful in the job market. I mean, technology is not the savior. I mean, there's a lot of problems, but technology can also be problematic. But it, in a way, it immediately changes. It changes one's, conditions and opportunities in the world. So I wanted to figure out a way to create lessons from from the workflows that come from each one of these projects.
Great. And what I'm going to show is somewhat limited. I want to keep it focused to folks who are working in the IRC right now, because I was excited that they could come and be part of this discussion today. So I'm going to show a slide from the first project that I did as a researcher starting in about 2000 and the one that we're currently working on right now. So I'm leaving out everything in between. This is a screen capture. This is a film still of a neuron. And this is from the film Euphoria. I imagine some of the audience has seen the exhibition at the Peale. So of course you can learn a lot more about that film there, but I just wanted to zero in on a couple of things about this. This film was in part inspired by neuroscience, which was exploding at the time. And because artists had traditionally had this link to, psychiatry, psychology, certainly going back 100 years, but much further in practicality. That was really interesting to me. And in working with some neuroscientists, we were talking about the recent discovery by Elizabeth Gould that neurons, you can actually grow new neurons, neurogenesis. In addition to strengthening the connections between the neurons that you have. But the point is that this meant that if you are a young person, say in school, and you're worried about, am I smart enough? You're asking yourself, am I smart enough to make something of myself in this world? The anxiety that I, as a school teacher for 16 years, experienced in young people very often. This idea that your brain can grow and intelligence is not fixed, like Popeye said it was when I was growing up, I am what I am. I took everything Popeye said to heart. But that was like huge. I could tell my students suddenly, no, it's not fixed. Your brain grows and changes based on what you do, how you challenge it. And this film also had a science component to it itself. It was a study to see if we could use metaphor to communicate important ideas like this to young people who are bored otherwise by educational media. Now to the project that we're doing now that Anita and Tristan and Ryan are working on with me. We're building a big, huge, space where you can put any kind of data. And where you can show really complex systems all at once. This is this is the way many artists think. Let's just get the whole mess in there so that we can see it. It doesn't freak a lot of artists out. It's not very reductive, but it's fine. And so we've started with georeference data. We have video data. That's an important juxtaposition right there, because putting qualitative information like video and personal stories in a space with georeference quantitative data is already a big jump for lots of folks. Again, as an artist, doesn't really bother me. And we also will be putting art in the space. So just like Euphoria, where we use metaphors to tell a lot of the story, you can pull a lot of information together and give it meaning by using traditional artistic practices, such as the use of metaphor and so on. This particular image is of a virtual sculpture that we can put into this huge data space that actually symbolizes 4 or 5 different principles of economic development that we're working on with 2 social scientists in West Baltimore, 2 economists. So I'm wondering if anybody on my team here can shed a little more light on this. For example, Tristan, just making a map function in this kind of virtual reality to be this liquid map that you've created is really a whole thing, right? It's very difficult.
Yeah, it was definitely an endeavor. took a lot of work and a lot of bright engineers other than myself working on it. It's a matter of fitting the requirements to the space, right? We don't want the map to overtake this whole room and overtake the importance, which is traditionally how you'll see maps presented. Google Maps takes up your whole phone or your whole screen. We want it to blend in kind of seamlessly. So that was part of the challenge there, was balancing those two things.
And Anita, I'm so glad that we have you measuring how people can take all of this in, the user testing piece. Can you just say a word about that?
Yes, definitely. And it's very, very exciting to be able to test a wonderful environment like this, because most people are very taken by it and engaged by it. And I think hopefully we could provide some useful feedback to the design in terms of just the usability of it, but also looking at how people would use it, what their reaction is sort of an other level of this evaluation of, what kind of analysis can they use it for? What are the reactions to it? So hopefully that was useful to the process as well.
And we're fortunate that Anita is kind of built into our lab now. She's associate director there. And so everything we do, we think about user testing with. And Ryan Zuber supervised the building of this very complex object, working hand in hand with the economists and with community organizing representatives. Ryan, I think this is a near finished version of this, but is there anything you want to say about what it was like to build this?
Yeah, I think, from the artist standpoint, I would just echo a lot of what you had said about the artistic process. Understanding just enough about these different components to be able to communicate them is definitely a challenge. But also, in addition to communicating them, we want to discuss formally how they should make somebody feel. So all of these things are economic concepts, but they also impact humans. They're about human beings and they affect human beings. So in this case, how can we imbue this sculpture not only with the concepts, but with hope and inspiration and positivity and the end goals that the economic process is supposed to create? And that's a challenge too. And it's something that, as artists, is something that's a lot of fun to work on for sure. So.
Excellent. I'm going to stop sharing. So hopefully that gives you a grounding in what these projects might be specifically. That's not certainly all the projects any of us are working on, or as I said before, even representative of what's going on in Baltimore in this area, but it gives people an idea. So now I think we can begin the discussion, and I'm just kind of throwing out to our panel, our roundtable panel, this question. On a day-to-day basis, we'll start kind of at ground level. What does this kind of collaboration look like to you? What does it feel like? How would you characterize it? Any thoughts on what it's like to be doing this kind of work? Eric, and you can just jump in.
I'm laughing because it's Go ahead.
To here, go.
It's a lot of it. A lot of it is being told no by your collaborators. Like, no, we can't do that. No, that's impossible. Either your collaborators or your funders. And but it can be done. So you have to figure out ways to approach, the grand idea. And that's where the real collaboration comes in. I'll just start with that.
Well, that's such a great point. I'll just say that it's better than being told yes when the actual answer was no. But anyway, go ahead, Eric.
The experience for me in the collaboration is a sense of freedom, giving me permission to use creativity and my senses, and also acknowledge that emotion, because I think somebody said something about the virtual sculpture, like, how are you supposed to feel? Okay, in science, we are trained, if you get a PhD in the sciences, you've been boxed in to exclude all of that and try to use things that can be measured that are quote unquote objective. But it's a little bit of a fallacy that those are objective. The other things are real, and I think that a lot of what we are suffering right now from is that those other things haven't been in science. That emotion and senses haven't been in science. So it's been a freeing for me, and that's led me into. It's made me happier as a scientist. I love science, but it's made me happier, and it's led me to very easy collaborations, not easier collaborations with non-scientists, which I think is incredibly important. And
Yeah.
also, I just have to shout out, I love talking to Steve. I just we get going and the time just disappears. It's a joy.
Yeah, I was going to add to that the trust that Eric and I have developed between ourselves, that I can be myself as a curious artist, ask those what might appear to be dumb questions from a scientist, and he's willing and able. He's a terrific educator, and he's got an amazing amount of patience. But I think the science methodology that I borrowed into my practice, the rigor and the persistence, learning from failure, learning from things when they don't work, not saying no to myself, I think has been a really important lesson. And actually, I look for those failures because those are some great teachers in terms of figuring out what it is we're trying to do. There was a point also that was really important, is being able to hang out in the IMET facilities, being able to be around engineers who are creating these sort of closed systems that these animals are living in, and highly protected and cared for. Became very close to, for instance, a whole group of nurse sharks in the Ark, which is, I forget what the title, what does the Ark mean again? Eric?
Aquaculture Research Center.
Right. And actually they would recognize me when I would walk into, at least I thought they did. Maybe they thought I was going to feed them. But the point is that to be around those kind of, that high intelligence, and that watching the scientists actually struggle with their practice and having ideas about how to improve, for instance, what they were trying to do by offering information like noise levels in the Ark, to me was something that I was really interested in, the sounds of the Ark. I was trying to listen to the animals. I couldn't hear them because of the noise levels that the machines that are maintaining their life support system.
Any other thoughts on what this work is like? I'm thinking about, Anita, you joined our lab as associate director in August of 2021. And I imagine you had some preconceptions maybe, or just some experience working with artists before then. Now here you are day to day, we're involved in this work. I should probably ask you this in a safer environment, but what do you think so far?
So it's a wonderful experience. I come from a field, human-centered computing, human-computer interaction, that is really sort of at the intersection of art, science, social science. So not necessarily a more traditional science field, but so I've been exposed to some of this, but working with artists on a day-to-day basis is just a very enriching experience to my research, because I'm learning so much, which is it's a long process. So it's been a year and a half, but I'm still learning. We're still sort of negotiating definitions of terms and concepts and processes of, oh, you mean that by that, I mean this by this. I'm using that word, in a different sense. So there's a lot of learning involved, even though our field sort of does touch on art as well. but also I think having that perspective is very eye-opening to see that creative process. And I think it feeds into our research a lot. So when we were at the opening of Lee's exhibit at the Peale Institute, it was eye-opening. I've never seen a lot of that work. So I felt like, I've been around for about a year and I've seen a lot, but seeing those art pieces really, informed a lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I think, like even more extended interactions and seeing more, because, I'm still half of my time is still in information systems department. So, but seeing more of the actual art and being more involved in the creative process, or seeing the outcomes of that creative process, would make it, it helped me understand so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So I think, the learning, the coming to the same meaning of terms, just seeing more of the art, and it informs different projects in different ways, right? So with C, I think we're building a lot on your art, Lee, and that's like feeding into the design of the space. You mentioned Lynn Casaban. So I think with Lynn's work, we're looking at the impact of her work on user experience, on emotional reactions, exactly what Eric has been talking about. And, how does that change behavior? How does that change attitudes? So I think there are different ways these fields fit together, but there's definitely great opportunities for how they inspire each other. So my experience has been great. I learned a lot, and I think it's really making my research a lot more meaningful and interesting. So,
Thank goodness. So that means you will be at work on Monday. That's awesome.
I'll be there.
So I want to prompt Tristan and Ryan a little bit, because you guys are so ground level with a lot of this stuff. And to hear, and Steve, I know you have similar experiences with people that you're working with that are helping you, create this work. As you said, to hear, people in the position that Tristan and Ryan are in, sometimes will tell you, that's a great idea, but we just can't do that. I want to ask Tristan and Ryan, either first or second, it doesn't matter, but you guys are both great to work with because you work very transdisciplinarily, as I think Anita and I do. But this idea that you guys are both very interested in the whole project, in the science, in the user testing, in the art, in how it's going to land culturally, all those dimensions, even though Tristan, you're acting as an engineer. You are an engineer and a scientist, and Ryan, you're an artist. You guys could be looking at it just through that narrow window, but you really like to think about the whole. Am I right about that?
Yeah, for sure. I would say working with scientists, as someone mostly from an artist background, the way that it's impacted me was just an increased respect for the process. I think the first project I worked on where I wasn't just sort of illustrating things, but was involved in the actual research was the buffet, virtual buffet. But anyway, seeing how carefully and methodically participants for these studies are chosen, how controlled the interactions were between researchers and participants, it led me to keep in mind right from the very beginning that measurement needed to be done, which was much different than anything I had really done before. Assets didn't just need to appear correct or behave reasonably, but they sort of needed to be, measured precisely, and the methods for creating those assets had to be deliberate and consistent and explained explicitly and justified in order for the science to be valid. That's not something I was used to as an artist, but it was definitely something, I unexpectedly enjoyed working over the course of that project and other ones. And I would say the other observation is a tension that I've observed. I was thinking yesterday about the idiom that a person can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. So artists love to sort of be in a balloon looking at the whole forest, seeing the flow of the land, how the forest changes over a wide area. And I've observed that scientists really like to get out of the balloon as quickly as possible and go up to a single tree and start studying and measuring the behavior of the insects in the tree and so on. And the argument that the artists would make is that if you go down the tree too quickly, your view of things is very limited. You can't see what's over there. It's over there. You're missing all kinds of stuff. And the scientist argues that you can't really understand what's going on in the forest until you get right down there into it and start carefully measuring and studying things. And of course, both are right, which is nice. So I think as both camps, if they can be called that, are exposed to the other, then that respect will grow. It'll be less jarring for everyone to go back and forth between the balloon and the forest floor, if I could use that. So those are just a few observations.
Those are great metaphors. And for me, a lot of those conflicts happen within myself because, I was trained at an early age to be an engineer. So engineer and a maker. So this is like from junior high school through to high school. I went to Brooklyn Tech High School. We had majors. I was an electrical engineering major, and then moving to college at Morehouse, I was in a dual degree engineering program with Georgia Tech. And then it was in undergrad that I realized that, I was more interested, I was a math major for a while, I was a physics major for a while, studied material sciences. And then I realized that I was way more inspired by art. So went into, went to Pratt Institute, which is like a culmination of art and design. And so I've learned to speak both languages and both influences are in me. And it's the reason why most of the art I make is, systems based. Like I don't really pick up a pen or a paintbrush and make a mark on a page. I decide to make a system. I decided to make a system that will make those marks. So when I work with teams, I really switch back and forth. And I think I start with, the artist way of imagining a radical future, inventing something that does not exist. And then, then we switch into the science, the science phase where we're developing things, and then we're kind of bound by the technology that exists or the technology that we sometimes have to develop to do the things we want. And each one of those phases, we're deep in the weeds, and then it's my job as the director to come out and look at a bird's eye view and make sure we're both, taking care of the artistic goals and the technology goals, the scientific goals. Because, especially if you're dealing with data, you can tell any story you want with data. But one of the things we like to do at the Rat Research Lab is kind of draw out the stories that the data are telling themselves, and I don't want to have too much of or any artistic hand in how that data is presented.
I love the range of art approaches here, that those comments bring out to here. Also, it's so great to hear more about your background. It's making more and more sense as I know you. Tristan, did you want to say anything before we jump on to the next question?
Sure. Yeah, I can just say I can totally relate to what Tahir and Ryan both said. Sometimes I feel like, there's the artist up in the balloon, and then as the engineer, I'm sort of the guy that's maybe strapped to like a rope and pulley, and I'm being lowered and raised and hoisted around in between the balloon and the forest floor, trying to keep the balloon afloat and, work those precise instruments. And then also going down to the ground floor with like the microscope and tweaking the tooling. I think it's an interesting literal balance act between those two worlds, and, how to communicate and translate between them is how I, as the engineer, sort of view it.
And I have to say, if you have a chance to get a Tristan, they're great because they can do both of those things. But I think there might only be one. So now we're going to go way up to 40,000 feet for a minute. And this doesn't have to be long. I mean, we've got, I do want to leave time for questions. So we've got about 20 minutes left before we begin with questions. But, we've talked about a little bit about what this is like at the ground level, but now let's back up and ask, what are these projects that we're doing trying to accomplish? We know we enjoy this process and it enriches all of us, I think is what the audience is probably hearing. But what do we hope the world gets out of these, or any particular person gets out of this? What are we doing this work for? What are we trying to accomplish? Anybody can jump in.
I think for Eric and me, and Eric, you feel free to chime in if you want to add nuance to this, but I think I've been involved in Southeast Baltimore City for about going on 13 years. And it started out working in telling stories with American Studies colleague Nicole King. I was exposed to sort of public history methodologies, sort of interviewing community members, getting to know who they are, what are the challenges that they face within that community. And so I started doing art projects, sort of what I call generosity art, looking at murals, including community members in that process. I never wanted to make murals. In fact, there are muralists that are 10 times, 1,000 times better than I am, but that's what people think of when they think of public art. So I kept hearing stories about environmental disasters in Curtis Bay, Fairfield, Wagner's Point, and started turning my attention to what does the biomes have to say about the environment? What does the ecology itself have to say? And so I was trying to connect human stories with bio stories, if I can use that metaphor. And so then that got me into more of the science component of this. So I also did a little bit of archival work with Keith Porter, one of the first scientists to look at the cell without killing the cell, or looking at the cell without destroying the cell. And so I had looked through those archives. And so that kind of catapulted me into really thinking about pulling science in and trying to expose myself as much as possible. So I joined a local group, BUGS, Baltimore Underground Science Space, which is how I met Eric and all of his colleagues. And so that curiosity, but also trying to solve a kind of large problem, which is environmental issues, and working with a community that has sort of lost their voice. Industry seems to have all the land that is near the water, except for Cherry Hill, the Middle Branch area. And so that really is what kind of got me into thinking about community engagement from a science art component, and including community members. I'm not going in and saying I want to solve these problems for you, but I'm coming in and listening. So it took me about 6 years before things started rolling, where community members were coming to me and said, Steve, we'd like to have you involved in this conversation about rain guards. We had a little flooding in parts of Curtis Bay around the Ben Franklin High School. And so I worked with the aquarium. That's how I got my first project, was with the aquarium community engagement. We made a rain garden and did a mural as well. And so that stopped the flooding on Ben Franklin High School grounds. And so each of those kind of projects were solving problems. But at the same time, I kept seeing trash, environmental issues, disasters happening in the neighborhood, and hearing complaints about illness, like public health is a real serious issue. So again, the science to me was hard information that could be augmented through artistic practice. I don't know, Eric, you want to?
Yeah, well, that meshes well with, I guess, my intent with this. I guess if there's a single theme to the intent, and that is to have a mechanism to force me to bring my science to where people are, or maybe not force me, but allow me. It facilitates that. One of the things I love about working with the BioBuggy and with that kind of visualization is that it allows us to bring an image to people. Let's say there's a barnacle on the screen. We'll get down to the specifics. We're not interested in telling people about the barnacle. First, what you want to do is there's just a barnacle, and it's kinetic, and it's got a really interesting motion. And then it just raises questions for people. So they'll have a lot of questions for me, but they also have stories about it. And so my favorite thing to do is just to have that barnacle there during a public outreach event and hear what people are telling me about the barnacle. And I think that and that's not just fun. I think that as scientists, we need to, we're not going to make good choices or, science, if there is a science, there's no single science. But yeah, I think that, yeah, Nicole's right. Exactly. I don't need to be the middle-aged white guy that tells you what your world is like, right? The world we have was built by people like me. So maybe we need to change that. But for me, so there's a personal part where I just love seeing the discovery and hearing about the stories about barnacles. And then, and the next step for us is to help me to make links with the communities or individuals who didn't feel like they have a space in science, like it's something outside of them or something distant from them. So I guess maybe there's two things. One is just make that link and essentially make it accessible, make what I do accessible by actually changing what I do, right? So that it's not only about making lots of measurements. Sure, we need to make a lot of measurements, and those measurements, we do them and they're important, but they're not the only thing. And it's to connect with people, you first have to get to why it's important or what they even think about it. So I do a lot of learning through this.
Yeah, you and I think the rest of us. It's interesting, and there's potholes along the way. For our projects, I'll just say, particularly the C project, which I didn't call it that when I showed the slides necessarily, but the project about putting a lot of different kinds of data and just a lot of data in one space without overwhelming people. I think our overall intent with that project goes back to this idea that, media and ways of making marks and ways of seeing what's in our head put down on some kind of other substrate or wall or put in the air or whatever is basic to the human species. As long as human beings have been around, we've been doing that. And in fact, most of what we know about what human beings were doing, or a lot of it, not all, comes from the fact that we do that. And I like that everyone's talking about the importance of understanding systems. To hear the systems that you're talking about are so beautifully presented in your work. And then, Steve and Eric, these ecosystems, these things are incredibly complex, except that the ways we have of using media, this thing human beings do, to talk about things, to see things, are not at all adopted to the idea of seeing systems. Quite the opposite. Our media are, at least for the last few hundred years, have been oriented almost exclusively to seeing one thing or two things, or maybe a handful at most at the same time. Well, that's great, but when we are a society now that has come to the realization that a lot of our challenges are emergent properties of complex systems, often colliding with one another, right? How can we think that way unless we can see that way? And so what we're trying to do is create a kind of media and a way of seeing that basically shows the world that we have to deal with the way it really is. And we think that current media methods are a far cry from that.
Yeah, I think, I agree. And when I first started the rap lyric analysis and archiving project, I would do the analysis by hand. I would, run it through some readability formulas, and I came up, and this is in the exhibition, I would come up with these, these stats that I designed into a postcard. And then I posted these on my web log at the time, and then the comment section just tore them apart, and they were like, this rap website sucks. And I'm like, well, this isn't a rap website. They're like, well, if you really wanted to do some work, you would analyze this artist's whole career, or you would analyze, rap from 1987. I was like, actually, that's a really good idea. So I just, so I took a break and I decided to create a system to do that analysis. And then when I did my first search in that, it's really small, compared to now, that smaller size database, and I got returned like this wall of data, like pages and pages of data. It was the first time that I peered into the abyss and really had an understanding of how vast this project is, just in general, like language is a technology. Like we use language to create our worlds every day. And then my focus changed to really to build a tool that other people can use to help me do this research. And the other part of the project was to find out things to make to explain the vastness of the project, So communication of this system, communication of the size of this project and what could be done with the project.
Well, this is illuminating. I hope we can all accomplish all the things that we want to with each of these projects, because if we do, it'll be amazing.
Can I just follow on
Please,
what,
Anita, please. Yes.
Several of you have said? I think it's wonderful to hear how you're building on what you're hearing from your audience and how you're connecting with your community. But I think from my perspective, my personal goal in this is understanding how people react to your art and to your work, and what the emotional reactions are. Are there any attitude changes? What are the behaviors, which is not trivial to capture and understand, right? Because people interact with art, look at art, you don't really want to interrupt them in that process. But I think understanding the reactions and the interpretations and how do they understand your message brings this to full circle, and hopefully helps you, helps your work as an artist or work as a scientist, but also build those connections with the community and build those connections with the audience. So that's sort of my personal goals. Lee, you mentioned Fuad Hamidi. I think his research is also looking at this, the experience of art as well. But I think, the findings of these sort of human-centered computing activities in this mix, right, hopefully feed back into the work that you all are doing.
Well, that is, and the whole issue of artists having our impact measured, I think as artists, some of us, right, that's like, whoa, really? We're that's a big thing. And that's a big threshold to get across. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned that. So finally, we have a few minutes before we're going to go to Q&A. I think someone's in the, oh, there she comes. Okay. Someone was in the waiting room. So I just want to ask if anybody has any ideas about this, how to advance this kind of social practice further, because from what I'm hearing here, again, by the goals that we're stating, it's a kind of 1 and 1 is 3 proposition, right? The synergy between art and science, and of course, other disciplines as well. We're focusing on science and art today, but there's, of course, the humanities are so important and so on. But this kind of collaboration and the synergy that it causes, I think some people would say this is going to be necessary to make progress. Certainly the writer that I quoted at the beginning might be inclined to think so. But what can be done to advance this? It's a fairly obscure corner of both the art and science worlds right now. I think in a way even stigmatized by, leading art journals and so on. I don't know that entirely, but I get that sense. What can we do to move this forward? Anybody?
In my experience, it's with the definition of design thinking, right? IDEO, was it Brown? Like
IDEO.
when design thinking came out, I was like, oh my God, this is new thing. You know, I'm trained as a communications designer, graphic design at Pratt Institute. So when design thinking came out, I was like, oh my God, there's this new thing called design thinking. I have to like get the book and learn what this is. And I got the book and I was like, yeah, that's what we do. But it seems like, you know, one of the influences of design thinking was that, you know, corporations and more, you know, business, business aligned corporations realize how important creativity can be for their employees to embrace, to affect their bottom line in a more positive way. And then, the next step of that was, you know, Stanford started the design school, and I think Harvard may have someone, Princeton, you know, the Ivies were like, oh yeah, design, like creativity is important. Let's do that. And then an outcome of that was a lot of corporations embrace residencies where, you know, one residency I was at was an Autodesk residency, and they basically invited us. They were like, come try and break the machines, because they knew with the way we as artists were pushing what the machines were meant to do, there would be learning that Autodesk and the corporations can incorporate into their next iteration, and then that would affect the bottom line. But it seems that that's, you know, that kind of excitement has died down, and I'm not, you know, I guess it was a fad. Maybe it was a trend, but I'm not really seeing that. Maybe it's been incorporated in a way that isn't so that isn't so. Maybe it's been incorporated in a way that's more nuanced. You know, you don't have to do a big press release to say, "Hey, we're inviting these artists to come use our machines." Maybe it's just part of the daily operation now. But those are some of the trends that I've seen.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
I'm thinking about, this is with complete ignorance, but for the funding entities, or maybe the organizations that like define or report on trends in art, I think that what would move it forward might be showing how science is changed by these collaborations with art. And it has to be done, again, we're talking about, now we're not talking about a general audience, we're talking about an artist audience, an art aware audience, that then in whatever jargon or terms or constructs that exist there, they need to see that those are being, I guess they're infiltrating the sciences, and that they're having outcomes. And I think on the science side, I'm not sure, because I've been funded by two different federal agencies, by, you know, like we've had philanthropists and other things, but of the two federal agencies that I can think of that are at poles of this, one is the National Science Foundation, that really thinks, if you could give it a personality, it thinks about creativity. It thinks about like looking into the fog of the frontier of human knowledge and saying, what we want to do is fund stuff that's like a little bit like that's, you can't tell what it is. You might not even see the shape yet, but you're kind of grasping for something. And I think NSF as an entity or culture gets that a little bit. And so their connections with the human dimension, I think, are there. And it makes it challenging for many artists to get funding there. Now, that's not the only kind of funding to do, but at their best, that's what NSF does. I also work with NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. That's an arm of the Department of Commerce. It is impossible for them to understand creativity in anything other than a rubric where there's a checkbox and a spreadsheet. So I guess we will start with, you know, but I think the idea is we need to get federal funding into those pathways that says, you know, for people like me and thousands like me who are applying for funding from entities, those calls for proposals need to have in their rubric, how are you using sensory input? How are you using input from your communities? And that's happening now. You can see the shift in the calls for proposals that you need to look at underrepresented communities. And it's almost gross how it's happening now because it's only just happening now. And my fear is that it will stop happening, like it will happen for a while, and then I'll be like, okay, we did that. So I think I think our challenge in science is to make sure that we keep these other things, that we bring in culture and we bring in arts, because we need to access everybody, because science won't succeed if we don't have new ideas.
I'm very sorry to interrupt like the voice of God here, but Karan or Cheyenne, we're not seeing an interpreter with video on at the moment.
I see Cheyenne in a small box.
You don't see me?
Not at the moment, but we do see Cheyenne.
I'm on the, someone needs to spotlight me.
No, your video's off. Go ahead. I'll continue.
Now my video's off. Now it's on. Is it on?
Yep, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sorry about that.
I'll jump in real quick here. I was thinking that this is not new. Remember the EAT program with, what did it stand for? Experiments in Art and Technology, you know, where Robert Rauschenberg and Billy Clover and Fred Waldhauser were engineers, right? And then that got disbanded. So, but look at the impact that has had within art and technology. And that was what, the 70s, 60s?
60.
And yeah, so we have models. It's just, I don't know why we don't persist and sustain these sort of opportunities. I mean, I wouldn't be in this position with Eric. Maybe I would have, without the support from Circa and I met working together through Tim Noy to develop this Circa artists in residence that I met, and it's changed my life. I mean, it's developed a strong relationship with the aquarium, and I met through my colleagues Eric and Charmaine, and so whatever we can do to continue in that was a very, very, very small pot of money, and afforded me like a semester to really focus on hanging out at the IMET and making underwater recordings in the harbor and observing in a situation that I would have never been able to do. So having that time and a little bit of support. And then just to add this one other thing, in the engineering department at UMBC are the ones that built the BioBuggy through a capstone. So having institutional like UMBC is a public institution, they're really living up to it. And that has made a huge mark on me as an educator artist and focusing on community.
So we're going to go to questions. I just want to sort of put a bow on this a little bit for my own thinking, and people can push back on this, but I think that there's almost, certainly going back to Rauschenberg, this has been true, but there's still a sort of exoticism related to this kind of work. It's still fringy and interesting and all that, but it's not seen as like the work that we need. And I'm really hoping that, with the challenges with our pandemic response, with the challenges related to climate change, even though we need much more science there, it is not the science that is keeping us from dealing with it. I'm really hoping that the science community and art communities can both realize that we can move forward better together. My little soapbox moment there. Okay, I think we can open this now to the audience. We've got 15 minutes left. It's never what it was intended. It should have been 20. But I'm hoping that people will be able to just raise their hand and be seen. Help me out, Kim or Nancy. How's this going to work?
Yeah, so I think we'll put the questions in the chat, Lee, and if you can just read them out there, we'll move from that way.
Okay, I can do that. In that case, I want to go back to a question. I think Elizabeth W. has asked several good questions. The first one was, how does the virtual sculpture that I showed represent theories of economic development? That's a longer story, and please contact me with the email that I'm going to put up at the end if you want detail on that. But I will say that in that sculpture that I showed, each element of it, there were those things floating around the outside, and there's a copper structure on the outside, and there was these kind of steel cubes. Each of those things means something like cultural activity, trust capital, social capital, and they're intended to be explicit symbols of those things that nonetheless work together and create an engaging visual. So that's the flyover of that. And then you asked, Elizabeth, and this is not for me, was there a sign or sandwich board that was an invitation to engage with that, with the BioBuggy?
Yeah, we had a QR code, and then I am generating these little coloring books, so I give those out when we just started that, so we haven't really tested that yet. We won a Chesapeake Bay Trust Award to do some programming, so Eric and I are just starting to. We've done some testing of it last year. But this year we're engaging with a K through 12 school and it may be Westport or Cherry Hill. We're still working that out. But yeah, that's interesting to think about. And I also have a flag. when I do public events, I have the flag. It's one of those teardrop flags that invites people to engage with us. But that's a great question.
And the answer was that we didn't have, I guess the short answer is we didn't have a placard that says, please ask us.
Yeah, that's true.
And that certainly we can do that. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
There's a question from Marjorie. Hope I get this right. I love your approach to engaging people by meeting them where they are. I think they might be talking about the BioBuggy, as with the barnacle example. Are you familiar with IDEO's design thinking process, which Tahir, of course, talked about? If so, how would you compare it? So how would you compare this design thinking process with what you guys were doing with the BioBuggy? Have you ever collaborated with them? She also asks.
I'm completely ignorant of IDEO, and so I'm taking notes. Steve?
Well, I guess the closest we got to that is with the engineering students. So that was a very interesting process. We're also coming out of COVID. So having the engineer students and their advisor working with us to think about, well, we also had limitations on our budget. But that's a great question. That's something that I'm beginning to think a lot about, is design both from the curriculum point of view, going back to the audience perspective, I think is really good. But that's something we need to probably look at very carefully and think about.
I should acknowledge also the role of a couple of other people that were involved in conversations that were really at the genesis of this. And one is an education expert at Maryland Sea Grant named Adam Frederick. And
right.
I think that he literally wrote a book on outdoor education that ended up being a foundation for the environmental literacy standards in Maryland. So he's been a great resource. He's a busy man, but he's been a good resource for that sort of very practical side.
My pepperoni mushrooms, okay?
Yeah.
Can you have mushrooms?
Yeah. I don't eat it a lot, Karan.
Okay. I don't know.
Okay.
Somebody's picking up conversations from elsewhere. If everybody could check to see if that's them.
I'm definitely down for mushrooms on my pizza.
Oh, for sure. Bring it on. Bring it on. Another question that Elizabeth asked while we're drilling into the BioBuggy quite a bit here, which is really great. She's asking, is, one could say that there may be science and art deserts, just like we talk about food deserts. Is that something you guys have thought about, or what do you think about that?
I think that's very true. I mean, one of the 10 years of work or longer in Brooklyn Curtis Bay, the little bit of art that children are getting is like maybe 40 minutes a week, maybe a little more frequently, depending on the, like Ben Franklin High School. It was, I guess about, I started working with Ben Franklin High School in 2010, 2011. And they had the special ed teacher was teaching art. And so UMBC students, I think it was an IRC Fellows group when IRC Fellows was around, which is a special research course that's taught by faculty with these talented students. And so we did an stop motion animation in the school on Fridays, 3 hours a week for almost a year. And they had this special experiment they were trying. It was a 4-day a week normal class time, extended hour per day. And then on Fridays, they did internships and so forth. I did an art class for 3.5 hours. Who has 3.5 hours a week with young children struggling with trying to figure out their lives and so forth? So we did this stop motion animation thing for about a year. And then the principal hired a full-time art teacher after that. So that impact, the principal like, oh my God, art is so important to these children, and hired a teacher and had the evidence and so forth. So there's a great example of creative intervention in a real rigid system. The K through 12 is just so difficult because they have certain things they're trying to live up to in terms of curriculum and so forth.
We've crowded out so much flexibility that it's really hard to venture into new areas like that. I think you guys can see in the chat, Eileen has asked, she says she loves the act of collaboration and the process of working with data. I think she's talking about your work to here, to find a complex machine. But her question is, how important is it for viewers of the art to visually comprehend what they're looking at, which seems to me to be also in your area, Anita. But anyway, maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit. To hear, or Anita, how important is it?
I was answering some questions in the chat.
Gotcha.
It's of utmost importance because humans understand the world. One of the ways that humans understand the world is through images, and through even our memories, even our language, like creating sequences of images that we communicate to someone else. So like I said early on, I switched the focus to, making cool things from this data into creating a tool that I can invite lots of people to make cool things with this data. And in that invitation, I've had to communicate the project and what can be done with the project. So the Mapper's Delight project is one way that visualizes these connections in the data. And the data come from, hip hop lyrics, but the processes and the input script and the analysis script that we created can be used on any text. So we could swap out the rap lyrics for any text. And, we can put overlays of health data, economic data, environmental data. We could do overlays with all of these other data to kind of like draw out some of these other stories.
And I'm sorry, Lee, I was trying to find a question in the chat.
Oh, that's all right. I'll just share it again a little bit. But she's asking, this is your world. It seems to me, I think it's all of our world, but this is what you study. You know, how important is it for the viewer to get what they're seeing, to understand what they're seeing with these projects? And I think it's a particularly important question when you put it in the context of both art and science, because certainly scientists are used to doing things that you really need a PhD to understand very often at one level. And I think artists are no different. You know, we not only because sometimes you need a degree in art history to understand what you're looking at in a contemporary museum, but also because we foreground ambiguity. We want everyone to attach their own story to what they're seeing and not be didactic always about what we're saying. So it's a much more problematic question than it seems. What do you think about that, Anita?
I think that's exactly the important piece, what you said at the end. So it's not just whether that audience understands your intended message, yes, no, but really understanding their interpretation of your intended message, right? And understanding their view on it, and then reacting to that view of interpretation, reaction, emotional reaction, action, that they sort of create in reaction to your art. So I think it's not so much a yes, no, did they understand it, but it's how did they understand it? What is their interpretation? So
I want to thank you, Anita. I think that's, you know, from your standpoint, that's having that scope would be essential, but you're still in the position of kind of measuring whether people get it or not, which is so hard to do. One of the things that occurs to me is that often the kind of results and findings that we have are influenced by how expensive the data is to collect on how it affects people. And so I joke about cheap data. You know, we're living on cheap data. It's like junk food turned into numbers and letters, because it's really hard to measure the impact someone might have by looking at your work to here or at your work, Steve. You know, it might turn over in their mind for months, even years, and then have a profound effect. How do you come up with the cash to measure something like that? It's very, very difficult. So I just, you know, finally want to say we have 1 minute left. If someone wants to drop a question in, let's see, it looks like if we put note, if anybody has one final question, I think we just have time to probably address that. Otherwise, everybody can, you know, go and have 1 more minute of napping before the Super Bowl. But are there any other questions out there? I think I've gotten to them all.
Yeah, okay, that's fine.
If not, just blast it into the chat right now. Let me see, science side.
Can I want to just express appreciation for being able to be here with all of you. To hear, I got really excited with your visualization of things on a map. Place is important, right? We have a sense of place. And I think that engaging people in science through place is incredibly powerful. And I'm trying to move to that. I'm trying to understand that. But also then there's engaging people through senses and engaging them through saying that their creative output matters to the world and the sciences. And I guess I would like to see we bring up K through 12 education. K through 12 science education is incredibly rigid, as somebody said. The idea of arts integration is really important, but if we can get that to work and then students don't feel like they're being, you know, force-fed information that's somehow different from them, separate from them, that they can't collect and they can't influence. If we can move that to like they can interact with it, they can express it through art or their emotions, I feel like that's how we get forward. So I'm excited in that sense of place. I just get really excited because you can overlay data and feelings and history.
So I am putting, thank you, Eric. And I want to extend my gratitude again to everybody for joining this conversation, especially the audience. I was able to thank the panel more specifically at the beginning. I'm putting my email in the chat. I don't expect everyone to do that, but if you send me a question or whatever, I'll do my best to direct it to other panelists who I think might be able to follow up with you. But I just really appreciate what everybody's done here and the conversation that they've created. I think that's it for today, gang. Thanks so much to everybody.